Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending the EDI Answer Hour. We're technically scheduled for a half hour, but if we go longer than that, that's quite all right. Um, we have a few things to cover, so let's try and jump into them. So as always, we try to give an agenda of the things that we're trying to cover in our answer hours. Today I've switched it up a little bit. What we have is we always have the release updates that are coming. They're a little bit light, but then we talk about our known issues. I've added something new called functionality reminders. I want to try and get some reminders out to everyone about technical things that we could be doing with campus that are important to touch upon. And then I have a little bit on the EDI scenario side as well as time for questions and answers. So since we last talked on March 25th, the one major thing that is a bit of an update, although I think everyone who may have sent this data field in since then or before then noticed that you weren't technically getting rejections. But Minnesota, we have technically added the new nature of injury code 38 for the adverse reaction to vaccination or inoculation. Those of you who know, the WCIO added that new code for nature of injury. It can be combined with the pandemic code of 83 as well to try and show that an injured worker has had a reaction. It's principally been done for the COVID vaccinations that are occurring. But it's also, it could go beyond that eventually. But for right now, I think we're just seeing it as being used in conjunction with COVID vaccinations. We're already picking those up, so those of you who are sending those, that's great, and it's a good reminder to use that data code if it applies to your claim. So we appreciate that. I've basically showing the same campus issues that we had in our last meeting, but just to keep them as a reminder because they are important issues to EDI senders. The first one is still documents that are generated from EDI. We do have some issues that keep popping up, particularly those related to PY transactions where they don't contain payment segments and therefore the form does not generate information related to the employee's claim. And then the other one is on suspensions, the SXs where return to work dates were not sent, but they did apply, particularly where an injured worker has actually returned to work and they're back to their full wage. It's important to make sure that the return to work with the actual return to work identifier is in the transaction, and that's what creates the NOID looking type form that you can then send off to the injured worker. We're still working on some EDI sequencing issues. They're particularly related to after RB has been submitted. It's hard to get benefit information to work after the RB. So we're working on that one to try and get those later SXs and also ABs to work so that that's fully functioning. And then also just to touch base again on match data issues. I know these weren't all particularly identified in our published materials, but the things that are really acting as match data are the SSN or the employee assigned ID, which we call the PIN. It's basically the thing that sits in the SSN field if you don't have the SSN and is provided by DLI. The other things that also trip up claims reporting is the date of injury. If it's different in the legacy, our date of births are also acting more like match data. So if you don't have a match on date of birth, you'll get an error message that says DN52 doesn't match. And of course, JCN and employee security ID or the WID, those are very key for Minnesota reporting. Those have to match for our EDI transactions. Then we're also experiencing some stickiness still with the claim admin claim number. DLI can internally change and make updates to some of the claim admin claim numbers, but once we get a claim going down the road and we get multiple EDI transactions in, it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to make changes or to get some claims unstuck with a claim admin claim number that's not correct. So it's just important to note that we're trying to work on these and make the functionality of those match data issues smoother, but also trying to make sure that if you can get those things right, as correct as you can out the door so that we don't run into those issues later on. There's a couple new ones this week that I'd like to touch base with. The first one is the trading partner dashboard. For those of you who have access to your trading partner dashboard, you'll notice that a lot of the information there it may not look quite correct. And that's indeed the case. The first action tab, the pictures of the dashboards that you're seeing that show timeliness or the reporting metrics, those aren't really calculating correctly. So if you have any concerns related to those, just be aware that DLI is working on trying to make those calculate correctly, and that's something that you don't have to worry about at this point. That those things are not quite lining up correctly. This is also a good time to remind those trading partners, if you're kind of the lead for your trading partner and you have not yet created or activated your trading partner account, now would be a good time to do that. If you no longer have the invites, which you probably don't, please reach out to us to make sure that you get lined up with your trading partner account. Your organization might already have Insure or TPA active, but we've discovered that a lot of our trading partner accounts are not activated. And since more functionality is starting to roll out in different ways, it's important that everyone has their trading partner account activated, even though the majority of the work that you're doing is perhaps through the FTP or your vendor. You may not need to access it very often, but it is important that you are up to date and you have access to that account. We also have, if anyone's dug into claims and looked at the benefits tab, trying to make sense of the benefits that have been sent through EDI, they're populating a tab that we call the benefits tab, and we're trying to get some fixes to that tab, but some of the transactions are not writing to it, so it's a little bit unclear at times. We've had some complaints or some questions, I guess, as to whether or not the transactions that have been accepted are really showing correctly, and it's true, they're not. They're not always there. So that's one of the other known issue that we're working on to try and rectify. Now here's the functionality reminders, and this is something I think is important, and we'll keep trying to talk about this, but I want to remind, it's not always clear what campus can or can't do, so this is one area that I think all the technically minded people on the trading partner, claim administrator, EDI account side is to try and remember the functionality that DLI does have available through campus that I think is important to help you in your efficiencies, making this whole process work well. The first one is that we've discovered that not everyone is getting the forms returned from EDI transactions. Those of you who are EDI through a vendor or directly through the FTP, that's a pretty good efficient functionality process. So this is a reminder to say that if you're having to access claims to get the documents from your transactions, that's probably a step too far. You should be able to get those directly from your vendor or from your FTP account as it is. We zip up those documents, all those PDFs into files, and we send them back to you. And so it's a lot easier to pull them naming convention. I'm sure many of you just pull them right down into your claims or other processes that you need to send those documents so that you have them right away. So that hopefully everyone can try and make that as automated as they can going forward to try and add a little efficiency to your day. The other one that's a little less known and isn't really been adopted yet, but we also have available, and the documentation's on our website, is if you want to send documents through the FTP to DLI, you can do that directly to us. So that's an option that we have. You'll have to touch base with us first, but we have the naming convention out there. It's per the EDI standard that you can send we have a whole list of documents like the PPD style web form, the medical reports. You can send correspondence to us, and those, as long as the naming convention is correct and you zip those up correctly and they're sent through the FTP, you can avoid navigating the claims and actually send those right through the FTP. There's probably a little bit of technical work to be done between the two of us to get that established, but again, I think that's another one of those functionality things that if you can make that work, it'll probably add to a lot of senders' efficiencies and make this process with campus just a little easier, so that you don't have to worry about navigating to the exact place all the time. And then there's one last one that we had a pilot project that was working on it, and we'd like to offer it to others if you're interested. And that is, DLI is trying to send all records that are generated, basically based on FEIN, back to the claim administrator through the FTP. This can be a little bit duplicative, but it's similar to how we send and receive documents through the FTP related to EDI. And that all correspondence, I think it doesn't encompass everything, but if anyone's receiving the emails telling you that there's something in campus, This is another way to get the records, the documentation that you're being referenced in those emails, but directly through the FTP. So again, it would be a technical process to set up between the two of us, but it's another way to streamline the effects of campus and getting documents to you right away in a process that could potentially be automated that may make everyone's lives a little bit easier. We hope it may not apply to everyone, but again, this is another functionality piece that is out there and we can offer through a little bit of setup work, and maybe it'd be a good idea for some people. Oh, okay. So I see a FTP. So FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. Think of it as through the web. It's a process somewhat outside of campus that we can send information back and forth. So most of our EDI transactions are going through the FTP site. So it's a highly technical thing. Folks on your IT side would certainly know what we're talking about. Okay, so I guess maybe I'll answer another quick question about, so Lonnie's asked, the documents that are notified by email, would they then go to only the file handler, not to everyone under our work group? So what this would be is if you're choosing to send and receive documents through the FTP, you would get a zip file of all the records with a naming convention as to what they are through the FTP. So your IT would have to figure out how to take that file of documents, and basically a big batch of PDFs. And based upon the naming convention, I think most people would want to put those into your internal files on your side. That's kind of the way we envision it working. Of course, we'd have to work together to make sure that that kind of fits with what you're doing, but it's essentially a way of kind of working around campus a little bit. You get the things from campus, but you get them directly to you. You don't have to navigate to them. So hopefully that helps.
John, I don't know if you saw Becky's question too. It says, once
Okay.
we file an SX with return to work date, how long does it take for a NOID to show up in campus?
That should be pretty immediate. If you're not seeing it rather quickly, then either it didn't have the proper documentation on the transaction to create the form, or we have an issue. So you can certainly reach out to us whenever you have a situation where it's not working as you suspected it should have. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think we had last time we met 2 weeks ago, we talked a little bit about some scenarios for EDI transactions and what can occur in an EDI transaction. And I think it's important that I kind of touched on last time, but to go back over some of the way that benefits work. And here I'm showing on the screen on slide 7 the other benefit type codes that Minnesota accepts. I also added in parens a little bit of description as to what some of those OBTs are. And that's another good thing to note is that when we talk about the difference between benefit types, we call them BTCs in the EDI world. Those are the main benefits like temp total, temp partial. But then we also have these supplemental types of benefit that are called other benefit types. And as you can see on our screen, they're a little different than the major benefit types that we often think about. Some like the main one that we've talked about before, the 340, which is the non-contingent attorney fees, like the examples are Heaton and RORAF. We also have rehab evaluation, which is basically the amount of money that a claim administrator is spending on rehab plans. Then we also have some other breakouts like 390, which is what might be getting spent on retraining or on the job training expenses or other miscellaneous rehab costs under 400. And then also like we have penalties above, which I'll get into a little bit as we talk a little bit about how an OBT might work with a claim scenario. So to make it a little more confusing, the way EDI works is, we talked about the benefit segment versus the payment segment last time we met. And I was trying to describe it as the benefit segment is like the anchor to the payment segment, which may be happening. It's like your payment segment is like the check you're cutting or the very specific payment information that you're sending in one instance, one iteration of what you're trying to cover. What makes payment payment segment's a little more complicated is that sometimes the OBTs also can appear in the payment segment, which of course they're then not in the main benefit segment, they're only in the OBT segment. So that's a little different. And some of the critical ones that can happen, those related to penalties. So if we ever get into penalties, those might come into play. And we do see them for 340, although that's not a requirement that you send the 340 as a payment segment to tell us that that's occurring, but those are options. So these are the codes under the payment reason codes that Minnesota does accept. And I know some folks have tried to send some of the other payment codes that we don't accept. So you would get a rejection for a transaction if you're trying to send a payment code we don't take. But these are the ones that Minnesota currently accepts. So here's a quick little example. Don't pay too much attention to some of the data in here, but I'm trying to just show the formatting of how we may send a PY to Minnesota showing a benefit segment as well as payment segments. And one of the payment segments is actually an OBT. So this one is sort of a non-specific. Let's say there was like an underpayment with a penalty or late payment with a penalty, something like that, so that you have to pay some temp total along with some penalties that are actually getting paid to the employee. So you populate the benefit segment with the benefit type that you're paying. It could be 050, but here I'm showing 550. So we know that there's some temp total being paid. That temp total also appears in the payment segment on the PY for the amount that's getting paid to the employee. But then sort of different from what we showed 2 weeks ago and how the payment segments might all add up to the benefit type. Now we have an OBT, and this is an amount that is getting paid to the employee as the payee, but the amount is under 311. So under the OBT 311, $50 would be added to that OBT or whatever the amount was prior to that plus the $50. And so that's a little bit different than what we showed last week, so that you may have that slight variation off of the structure that we were showing where it's a clear cut, everything's like the 500 code, whereas now we have different codes, even though they're all kind of related to the same thing that's happening, the same transaction that's happening. So that's an important factor to consider when looking at payment segments. I hope that's helpful to everyone some people, this is obvious, simple review, but for others who are new to EDI, this is a little bit complicated to understand sometimes. So hopefully this helps. Okay, so I'm also showing on slide 10, we do have we always like to show our Campus Central webpage. I actually included the link below. That's always a good place to go. Tomorrow we should have more of our release notes coming out by the end of the day tomorrow, since tonight is another release time. There aren't a lot related to EDI like I had shown, but if there are other release issues that you're trying to monitor, those may pop up tomorrow. You can always access those at the Campus Central webpage. So questions. Does anyone have additional EDI questions that we could try and answer today?
I am not seeing any more in the chat as of yet.
Okay, so Bridget asked a question. If you do neglect to put the return to work date on your SX, is there a way to fix this through EDI so that the form? Unfortunately, Bridget, there is not, and that is the issue that we're obviously having with the forms generated from EDI. The challenge is that you really get one shot at hitting a TA on some of these, and if it doesn't all the data isn't there correct, it makes either it doesn't generate a form or it makes a form that's nonsensical or isn't correct. And that's where the department has been saying, well, if you need to, you can make changes to that form and then send that off, making sure that you then upload that document back to campus. Or you can also use an old form if one didn't generate at all. You can use, if it's a NOID, let's say, you can go find the old NOID template and create a NOID form and send that, then upload that to campus as well. This is something that we're working on, trying to get some better logic behind this to make it work, but that's certainly where we're at right now. Have you fixed the issue with the system not accepting 0 for either weeks or days of benefits paid? No, I don't think that's fixed yet. It's not, it doesn't happen always. So I think, Lisa, that's most likely happening with e-filing. I don't think that should reject for regular EDI filings, but I believe that's something that we're still trying to work on to make sure that those can come through, because obviously sometimes the number is 0 and it is requiring you to have a number present. Any chance that the date served on the forms generated from EDI would ever be pre-filled with EDI filing date rather than having to manually edit it? I think that's a possibility. So any of you who look at the forms returned by EDI, similar to our original forms that we used to have, there is a date served, sometimes also the date served to the employee's attorney. I think the issue that originally was thought through is that populating the dates served based upon the form generated may not necessarily be the correct date served. So the issue is the reason why it was set up so that you would have to manually add the date served to the document returned is, let's say you served it the next day or a couple days later, that it would be inaccurate to have that date served as the date that EDI generated the form. So that's why that still exists, but we can certainly look into whether or not that's an option to have that pre-populated or pre-fill.
John, Deb has a question. Oh, I responded to Lonnie. We have our system program to date uh, is stamped into the form when it's printed to be mailed, just an idea. And then Lisa said if an initial NIPLD IP is incorrect dates due to information received, ooh, it's skipping on me, at a later date, what's the best way to replace the form information?
Yeah, so the first one from Deb always has great ideas, and that is a great idea. If when you're doing that action, it's great to have your system update and date stamp that as it sends out. So that's a great idea. As far as so if this is kind of the issue with EDI, and here's a great example from Lisa. So if you submitted an IP and it creates an NLPLD, and you later discover that there's been an update or something needs to be fixed, there's a number of different things that may happen. So you may be able to send a SHROI-02 to update it. More likely, I think it's going to be a SHROI-CA because something has changed dramatically. So there's a change in amount, let's say. There's also a remote possibility it would be a PY to fix whatever's happened. So there really is no simple way to say, oh, I'm going to submit the IP update or something. It isn't that simple. So it's also not going to create another NOPLD type form for you. So if you think it's a major fix that needs to be done, and because you want the form to generate, you're going to have to do that yourself, and then, like I said, upload that to campus. But there are multiple ways, depending upon the facts of your claim, how to update the claim itself through EDI. It might be this, like I said, it might be a SHROI-02, it might be the SHROI-CA, it might even be a SHROI-PY, or even sometimes the best thing to do is just send the SX when it occurs. So, and that fixes everything as well. So it may reconcile at the time of the SX that your claim is being paid at the correct rate and the correct amount and everything else. So that also works as well, depending upon the specific facts of your claim.
Okay, then Kathleen asks, are we required to upload the generated document in Campus once we add the served date?
Yeah, I'm going to say no. That is not a requirement. Great question, though. So I'm also adding our EDI email account, and I'm also adding my email address as well. I just want to make sure that if anyone wants to look into exploring adding additional FTP related functionality, reach out to us and see. It's not going to be an overnight process, but it's something we can look at with all senders to make sure that you guys are getting everything out of campus that you're looking for so that we can work together.
Okay, and then Bridget has a question. She says, I think previously 340 legal expenses would reject if sent in payments section. Was this fixed?
Yeah, Bridget, let me look at that again. I was looking just today to try and see if that, I thought I had a memory of that too, and I didn't find any rejections for 340 payment segment, but let me check again and confirm whether or not that's the case. Obviously, that if that were the case, it would differ from our published documentation, so I'll dig into that and try and confirm. So thank you.
All right, John. Then Lisa asks, what is the best way to upload a form we have completed on our own due to technical difficulties using the WCC forms?
Right. So I think this is not the strongest point for me, but you have to you have to sign into campus, navigate to the claim where that that the document's related to, and then upload that form to that claim. Um, what I was trying to show with our functionality updates is that there is a way to do that through the FTP, so we can always talk to you about that. But otherwise, you have to try and actually navigate to that claim and upload another record.
Okay, then Sharon says that she had a PY rejected today because of the 340 code. She said she refilled it with other fees, refiled it with other fees.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. So I'll look into that again. I think the question is the other thing with 340 is I mean I'll log an item on this perhaps, but when it comes to 340, it isn't something you need to tell us in a payment segment that you're that you're paying heat and RORAF or whatever. But we can look into allowing that because it is in our published guide materials that we did accept that as a payment reason code. So I'll check on that one. So thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay, well, I hope both this short EDI answer hour as well as I know we have yesterday the TPA insurance company answer hours. We're trying to cycle these every couple weeks. We try to have these. I hope they're helpful. We try to do the best we can to provide important information to everyone, and we all help us all move along with campus and getting used to how this new system works and how all our reporting functions. So again, keep all the great questions coming to us. We really appreciate it, and we certainly appreciate everyone working with us. So unless there's any other questions, I guess we can adjourn our meeting.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.